Okay, seems like everything started out properly this time. I think we're good. How are you? How are you, sir? Good to have you back.
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. We've got summer has finally kind of started in my near area of Canada. So we've got some temperature in the teens and 20s, which is really nice. And sometimes the sun even comes out, so I'm really privileged that way. Yeah, let's
Escape
see.
from the house and go outside.
I mean, if I could record this outside, I would. But I just don't have any cables long enough to do so. um, yeah, so I'm glad that we got you back again, sir. We are ready to get going pretty soon. Just waiting to hear confirmation that we're leveled in the chat. Um, yeah, it's we did well. We just had Memorial Day weekend. We had celebration of our victory at D-Day just recently, so it's a good time. Uh, a lot of events happening right now, and summer movie season has started. And I think tonight's script will be an interesting one, reflective of some of the things of that nature. Looks like sound is all good. So let's get this one started, shall we? Welcome to Scripts on Saturdays, the only screenplay review show on the interwebs discussing scripts both professional and amateur, circulating around Hollywood, giving you, the TV and movie-going audience, a behind-the-scenes and inside track on what writers are pushing and what producers are buying. I am your host, the Script Doctor, and joining me this week is Jake of 52 Movies a Year. Welcome back, sir. Happy to have you back. Um,
Thank
we had a fun script this week, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. A bit of an interesting read.
It is
Uh,
a bit of an interesting read, right? It's
yeah, had some highs and lows, some things that intrigued me, and then some things that confused me, and uh, yeah, kind of a little bit up and down.
and we're going to discuss those up and downs. So for those of you who are, if you're like, just to do a little plug here. So on the Patreon, I let all my patrons know what script it is we're going to be reading on the Monday preceding this show. You guys out there have a chance to, if you're a Patreon member, you can comment on that post with your questions, your own takes on the script, and whatnot, and we'll read them out here on the show live. If not, that's not a problem. We'd have no issues with that. We'll still keep the conversation going. But this week's script we have is an interesting one. It's called Head Games, and it's from the 2023 Blacklist, and it's written by Colin Liddell, and it placed number 4 with 23 votes. Jake, please share with us the log line of Head Games.
Okay. A corporate spy poses as a personal chef to the disgraced founder of a neuroprosthetics firm in order to steal his seismic shifting new invention from his secluded villa in Greece.
Uh, yeah. The synopsis is as follows. Jacob Dalton is a private spy who specializes in deep infiltration espionage. His latest mission is to befriend an eccentric genius to discover his latest invention regarding memory restoration and mental health, only to slowly discover that he is the one being infiltrated. Um, I found the log line to this initially because I commented on all these log lines when the Blacklist came out on my Patreon late last year. I thought the whole using the term of seismic shifting new invention was a little off because I mean, the writer is trying to
You,
convey that this is such a big invention, it's going to change the world. But when you're talking about neuroprosthetics and seismic shifting and things of that nature, it's like, well, what tech? You're dealing with two different types of technology here, because seismic shifting is actually something that's related to fracking, and then you have neuroprosthetics. So when I first read it initially, I'm like, I think this guy's a little confused on what he's trying to get at here, and I was worried about this log line. Um,
yeah,
but
the
then,
seismic part does end, earthquakes and maybe some sort of weapon or
yes,
something to.
like is
Yeah,
it is it
yeah,
a neuroprosthetic that can change the weather, like or something of that nature, right? Like that's what you get at
right.
first, because really he should have said like game changing or
Yeah,
a watershed moment, like something a bit more abstract that as opposed to something a little bit closer to the specifics, because how often is it's a seismic level shift? How often do you hear that in the phrase of technology? Like for me, I read the tech journals here and there. When Wired was a thing, I used to read that. I never would see that phrase come up, so it kind of threw me off a bit. But when we get into the script, we actually understand what it is. It's a breakthrough in neuroscience and chemistry. So, Jake, to start it off, share with us your first impressions of this script, Head Games.
I like mystery. I like spies, movies, and stories. So I would read this and watch this. Just you've got me already. I like the more tech involved. Definitely, those are things that intrigue me. So I'll give a read. I'll keep reading through something that may or may not. I may not read a drama or something else all the way through if it's not great, but I really want something like this to be good because that's what I'm interested in. So it kind of hooked me, that part, the content and what it was about from the beginning.
Yeah, because I mean, it starts off interesting. Like you got this black void, you have this description of like a squid-like creature in the dark,
Yeah.
and then we get into these set pieces of people experiencing some trauma during like a high-stakes situation. And then once we get through, like there's this older brother, they're trying to hide from some sort of person that's hunting them down. And so it's really intense. And then later we get to what appears to be that person from his childhood grown up. And then he just self-immolates, and it's horrific. And then we transition into a kitchen where fire and smoke is occupying the space. And we're introduced to our main character who he's not really a cook. I mean, he's a cook, but he's not a cook. So I mean, it's complicated as it is to introduce. He works at this restaurant in Greece where he's technically a waiter, and he's been cooking for this one customer named Graham, who's an older fellow in his 60s. And our main character is named Jacob, and he's late 20s, intelligent, and he's having this conversation with Graham about the meal and how he's like what he prepared for him is not today's special, that the chef didn't make it, he did, and he just hands it over to Graham, and it's we find out, it's Graham's family recipe, which he never provided to Jacob, but Jacob managed to pick up on what Graham was asking or talking about in the previous encounters he's had at this restaurant. So we're establishing an interesting history between these two characters.
Yeah, I really liked that. I liked the intrigue of the two or three different events that led up to that, and then the first two characters. I was right up to it right there. I kind of keyed in on when he said "I lied." That was one of the first words he said interacting with Graham, and I thought that kind of gave a little bit of innuendo of what he's actually really there doing. Kind of like the first word he says was "I lied," and it turns out he's there technically in deceit. So I like that. I like the way that played along as the first words you'd be hearing.
Yeah, because it also sets up the dynamic that's going on here. Like from the visual side of things, we have Jacob, who's a waiter pretending to be a chef who made something for a customer, which, that can get you into a lot of hot water because there's food handling regulations throughout most of the civilized world. So a waiter shouldn't be preparing your meal. The chef should be, and the waiter just as a conveyance. But we have this interesting dynamic where we're getting in this one scene in a very short amount of time that Graham and Jacob has been this guy's waiter for some time. I don't know how long exactly, but enough that they've had conversations. And even though they're not necessarily on a first name basis, there's a level of acquaintance between them.
Yeah. It kind of indicated a couple of months, and that was just easy to buy into.
Yeah.
It felt real. It felt like smooth, a good start.
Right, and we also get this setup with Graham and his late wife, where he says, like, my wife used to make me these certain dishes. Since you've got potential, because what Jacob makes Graham actually quite likes. I mean, it's not like blowing this mind out of this world, but it was really like he's really quite impressed, and so Graham gives him a challenge. Like, if you can, make this mushroom Wellington. My wife used to make it, and this is the ingredients that she had. If you can make it so good that it feels like my wife is in the room with me, putting her hand on my back, yeah, I'll make you one heck of a great offer that could really benefit you.
Yeah.
And that kind of starts things off, and you get the sense that, oh, this is kind of interesting. Like this guy is going to take advantage of this waiter who's got desires to be a chef, and a good one at that. And then we get a twist a few pages later where Jacob's never really been a chef. He learned how to do this very recently, all for a job, which is that Jacob was hired by Graham's son Niles to find out what Graham's been working on. And we get this nice little unfurled slew of information that Niles is the head of a board of a company that he technically stole from his father. And their competitor is nipping at their heels with some new technology in neuroscience. And Niles suspects that his father Graham has made the breakthrough that they're trying to do, and since they're not really on speaking terms, and there's a lot of paranoia on Graham's part, Niles hires Jacob to find a way to infiltrate and get the information so that their company can stay number one within this field of science.
Yeah, and see, actually, that's where I first started to have a problem. The only problem, and it was minor, but I was in establishing their dialogue. They kind of established that he had pushed his father out.
Right.
And Jacob had researched that and found that out rather than Niles telling him that. And I was kind of going, it's kind of ironic that now you need him and you need what he was working on. But when I thought about it later, I went, well, why? I mean, so Niles just wants to take what his father has. He wants the family business and he wants it now. That's interesting, right? But nothing kind of has led up to that. It just, as I think about it, I'm going, okay, that must be his motives. That must be what he wants. But it's ironic now that he needs it. So in a way, I'm kind of conflicted. I'm going, well, I understand what Jacob's doing here, and I understand Niles hired him, and I understand Jacob lied to Graham. But I'm kind of going, well, you kicked him out of the company.
Yeah. It's
so,
basically, this is of your own doing, kind of.
Yeah, this is of your own doing, and it's a little confusing because, okay, there's a lot to take different directions, but okay, and you learned how to cook, and and I like the spy aspect of it because spies seem to be always good at everything immediately.
Right. I mean, and the other idea is that, like, Jacob is kind of not really the one that comes up with the whole impersonating the waiter type of thing. Like, that's a whole Niles. Niles is like, this is the one place we see my dad go every day. We're going to put you in there as a waiter, and you're going to find your way in. And he's just like, that's a good start, but I'm going to need to do something a bit more. And that's where Jacob says, okay, I'm not just going to pose as a waiter. I'm going to become an amazing chef so that I can use my position as a waiter to get in with Graham here, and I'm going to find out from Niles the dishes that his father likes so that I can find a way to kind of incept those ideas into Graham so that I can present them and make them and get in his good graces. And we get, and this is the one thing that kind of bothered me a little bit too, is because we get this exposition via a flashback, and then in that we get another flashback where Jacob is in his apartment in New York, cramming and practicing constantly to become a very competent chef. And then we go back to the previous flashback between him and Niles, and then we come back to present day where basically Jacob has made the dish. Graham has said, dude, I love this. I want you to be my personal chef. And Jacob says, well, no, I've got this other job offer to be a head chef over here. And Graham says, I will double what they're offering you. And Jacob's like, okay, great, good. I'll do it. And this is all part of the ruse to get Jacob into Graham's compound, which is this beautiful landscape in Greece with private commissioned statues of various Greek gods and characters from their myths all strewn about the compound. along with this crazy tower that emits a low hum, and only that hum vanishes as Graham approaches it. And it's quite interesting because no other creature goes around it. Every time they get close, they hear the hum and then they just scurry away. And
Yeah, and I liked the way he set that up as far as like, my I like technology and stuff like that. So I like that setup. So whether it was done well or not, it was interesting and it kept me going. And some of the dialogue up to that had really been interesting. So I like that. And I thought, okay, yeah, this is going to come into play later. I just hope it pays off.
right,
But it
and
stood out. I like that.
yeah, it kind of pays off a little bit towards the
Yeah. Yeah.
towards the end without getting any into any spoiler territory, because a lot of that does
Sure.
come later on.
Yeah.
But
But I liked that, especially from the perspective of if I was watching this movie or, I'm reading this and I'm learning about it. I like that that was put out there. That was one of the things I did like. It didn't miss those things. They weren't sometimes some of the things it did miss, and I'm like, wait, when did that come? When did that happen? How did that get there? This wasn't one of them. This was one of the
no, this felt
interesting.
like it was more okay. This is not just a plot device. There's something else going on here.
Sure.
But like I mean, for myself personally, I don't know how you felt about this, but by the time I got to 20 pages in, I'm reflecting on everything that I've learned so far, and I'm asking myself, what of Jacob's voice, of his characters, of the choices of words he used, stands out among Niles and Graham, the other two characters we have seen at this point? And I can't identify it. The all three of these characters feel like they're the same person talking, with a slight tweak of regards to what they're each trying to get at, like what their goals are. And this was one thing that I encountered throughout. I'm wondering if this is something that you noticed too, is that sometimes you'd read a conversation between Graham and Jacob, and you'd forget which one is Graham and which one is Jacob because they kind of sound the same.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? You're right. As you point that out, yeah, you could almost switch their lines and they're just having verbal, the dialogue was just verbal sparring that you typically see in spy movies, which is cool,
Yeah,
but usually it's words and they hook on a device or a thought or an argue over something minor. And if it sounds cool, that's one thing, but you're right. There is you know, no distinction between the two. There
it,
wasn't
yeah,
really
it,
I know you would say this because, or Jacob would say this, or Graham would say this.
yeah, because even when we get like, I mean, one of the things that I will give props to this script is that it has a very small character count. There's only really 5 characters to memorize and concern about here, which means that this is being written strictly as like a low budget film, even though it's got some huge elaborate set design, locations, and whatnot. It's trying to keep the cast very, very small, in the sense that it's primarily just Jacob and Graham, with our we have Niles, who's clearly like in the background, a couple of days filming for him based on this script, and then we have this
Yeah,
other character named Andrea, who it's best pronounced Andreu.
yeah. Point that out.
uh, but she's this blithe, wiry woman in her 50s who's kind of like the chief of staff of his estate, so to speak. She operates and organizes everything around for him. She doesn't. She's just kind of curt. Like the only thing that she doesn't really have any long lines. She's very, precise. Only when she's in lecture mode does she have like a monologue of sorts, and even then it's like maybe a 10-line monologue. It's basically on par with all the other lines, because Jacob and Graham each have big blocks of lines in dialogue with all their conversations, because they're all kind of pontificating out certain ideas, sparring mentally with each other in a very peculiar relationship, because again, Graham is the owner of this estate, and he has paid Jacob to be his personal chef, and Jacob's tasks are whatever's in the kitchen he makes, and he makes it for them, and we get a couple of meals that he makes, and then he goes into town. Like it's just, it feels almost like a meandering type of setup, where it's like, okay,
Yeah,
this is what his day is going to be like, or his days there are going to be like, and it doesn't really give us much insight into who Jacob is, or who Graham is, aside from the fact that Graham has this statue of Prometheus being tortured by I guess the Raven or the Crow. I can't remember which one because my history in that part is a little vague.
Yeah.
And it's underwater, like it's in this pocket cavern that's like 20 feet or so or more underwater. So you have to swim down, swim through the cavern, and then you get into the air, and then there it is. And I use the image from the description on the thumbnail here, where there's light shining in from somewhere within this cave on this statue, and we're given the hint that aside from the person who carved the statue, Graham and Jacob are now the only two people that have ever seen it. And this is I thought this was an interesting move. So what were your thoughts with that?
So I liked that in the idea of it, maybe not the execution, because like you said, Jacob to Andrea was just, this is the rules, I want to break them. But Grant, I liked that, and I'm assuming that the story between the statue is something to do with father and son and the gods and stuff like that. I don't know it, so again, but because of the content of the script after reading it, I'm assuming it has something to do with that. I liked the visual picture of it, and I thought that would be cool to see, but it kind of, I don't, and it pays off later that you needed to know that. So I was torn between this is cool and this needs to be a way to, this will be used later on.
Yeah, there's something allegorical here because it's about, so like Prometheus, he's punished because he gave fire to man, and that's why.
Yeah.
And what we find out what Graham is doing here is he's playing with fire, and as is his son Niles, and at the same time so is Jacob. So you have all three of these characters essentially playing with three various types of fire, and one is going to burn the other two, and we don't know which one that's going to be. And I thought that's a pretty interesting idea of what's going on here.
Yeah, I liked that Greek setting of all of that because I felt like, that does lead into the overall story. So kind of just like background. The background is also part of telling the story.
Yeah.
But only if you know it.
Well, I mean, it's trying to establish like there's something epic on the verge. And I thought that was really cool. And we get a taste of that a little bit. And this is something we talked about a little bit before the show, so I want to let you lead in on this, where, Graham asks Jacob to tell him his first lie. So, Jake, please share your thoughts on what you thought of that moment, because I thought those were really good ideas.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I like it, again, I like it in theory, I like the idea of it because I liked how he explained where he's a spy, he lies for a living. It was a little bit kind of forced that that's the one thing Graham wants, a moment of honesty is where he says, where you learn to lie like a man. And I was thinking to myself, I don't know of anyone who looks at lying as something you do as you grow up or it makes you a man. So I thought that was a little interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it goes through the entire story of how he wanted to see the rapper and yet he lied to his father, I guess I could believe the story because I could see his motivations through that, but only through the backstory. But I had just kind of lost it from the beginning because I'm like, are you asking about a lie specifically because it relates to what Graham is doing? Or as we're watching the story, we're watching this movie, if we were watching the movie reading the script, we know he's a spy, and so we know lying's a big part of his life. And so I thought it stood out and it was good to keep, but it was that the point.
Right. That's a good question. Was that the point?
Did
Like,
it need
what
to happen?
Yeah.
It happened because it was organic, or did it just need to happen to move to the next place in the story?
That's part of the things that I was pondering here, because Graham, when Graham asks him, "Tell me your first lie," and he's like, "The one that made you a man." This isn't just. I mean, to your point, absolutely yes. Lying is not something adults should be doing. However, it is still part of society to various degrees.
Right.
But what I think he's getting at here with the lie is like the first lie you tell, like the serious lie, is your first, venture into losing your innocence, right?
Sure.
It's like your
Yeah, yeah.
deceptive nature is now you are no longer an innocent person. You are now an architect of your own design, and you're manipulating other people. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And so Jacob gives him the story, which is that he wants to see the rapper. His folks would never let him go, although they would let him go to other concerts. They would never let him go to that one. So he concocts this ruse where he studies his father's favorite musician, finds out that they're playing not too far away from the band he wants to go see, and exploits his father's love of Bruce Springsteen
Bruce
to
Springsteen,
get
yeah.
permission to go to this place alone. And it works. And everything is fine. And he pulled one over on his folks. And then we also discover some exposition here, which is that he drank a whole bunch of soy sauce and found out that he's susceptible to seizures when he has too much sodium in his body.
Yeah.
And that him going into a seizure, and then of course the paramedics being called, and then of his parents being called. Well, his dad, we learn, is a person that's not a very careful driver to begin with when there's no panic. And so his dad and his care for his son led him into the car. He drove to rush down to the amphitheater where the concert is being held. And he gets into a car accident and he has to be put into a induced coma for surgery and to be stabilized. And when he does make it out, his dad is disappointed and proud at the same time, gives him some advice, and then passes away a few days later. And I'm thinking at this entire time throughout this moment here that this is Jacob just manipulating the heck out of Graham, telling him this fake story just to kind of get in his good graces.
True.
And the most disappointing aspect is that later on, as we get closer to the third act, we find out that story's real. He told him a real story. And I'm thinking, no, you ruined it. Like, the movie's called Head Games. We should be constantly doubting what Jacob is saying to Graham, because his goal is to try and find out what this technology is that he's working on. And the moment you convey that no, he was telling the truth, it's like, well, now I look at him as like a bad spy.
Yeah, that's and is he a bad spy? Is he playing like multi-level head games that
Right.
No one's following, or are we just setting up information that will be used down the road? And turns out some of that was to the point. I kind of felt like it was an interesting way for the writer to get that bit of information. Was it what it turned out to be? And true or not true, he just needed that thing to be told so that we knew that later when another item happens.
Right. I mean, because again, there's a lot of layers. I mean, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of layers to that story that pay off later on. The thing that I felt kind of hurts
felt so weird right then.
Yeah.
So the payoff wasn't, like you said, he's a spy. He should be playing head games with Graham, trying to manipulate him. And yet he's telling him the truth, but yet the subject was, tell me your first lie. And I can understand, telling a lie as he's describing it as you described it. He's basically acting like a spy to his father when he was a kid.
Yeah.
Okay, how do I get what I want? How do I fool you into doing what I need to do? And so it really sets him up as a super spy, and I can buy into that. But he also, the thing at the end where his father tells him the moments of listening to Bruce Springsteen, where he had established his love for Bruce Springsteen, he listened to it over and over with his father, and his father says, well, I don't even mind because I'll remember that forever.
Right.
And then he dies, and then I'm just like, I felt kind of like, I don't like that. I don't like that payoff. That didn't pay off the way it was supposed to. It was kind of just, I felt like later on down the road, maybe when Jacob's struggling, which I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. If I would have cut that part out, maybe just said, yeah, I had, dumb prank. I drank too much soy sauce, had a seizure. My dad had gotten an accident, and then leave that part alone, because I had a thought. one of the things I thought would have been more impactful, and I would have felt something for Jacob. And maybe when Jacob's struggling with his conflict with Graham down the road, his father, because we're dealing with memories, I won't get into it right now. I'll bring it up later.
Right. I mean, but
I
they're
would
fair
have pulled that
points.
out.
Yeah, it's like there's certain reservations that should have been taken to build up to something. Um,
Yeah.
I will say this, like I was basically hoping as I was reading after that story was told that this was Jacob's lie to kind of get in with Graham,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
Graham only does trades off a little bit of information as well. They start sharing, they start smoking a pipe after they eat, and they kind of bond a little bit over that. And I like how casual it was set up for this nature. But as we get further and further, we slowly learned that the technology that Graham is doing is he's creating or he's rebuilding synthetic neural pathways to help people relive memories as if they're happening for the first time. And then the other aspect is that he's helping people with schizophrenia by basically bypassing the pathways that cause schizophrenia with this technology. And it's used through essentially like mushroom spores and things of that nature, like fungi. And it's really fascinating. Like there's a lot of techno babble in this and a lot of brain chemistry thrown around that I had to like stop for a minute and then check out some medical journals to give myself some context of that. So I would say props to the writer for doing his research because a lot of it kind of lined up from what I was able to glean in my research of this throughout the week. But
So did you like that as a screen, or did it get too much technical to really enjoy?
that's a good
Would it
question.
work well into a movie? I guess.
Would it work well
Would
into
the
a movie?
audience?
I think it would go over a lot of people's head in the way it's presented in the movie because it's too scientific. I think if
Yeah.
they found more allegories as to what they were trying to do, which is like, oh, okay, so we all have our memories and they all feel like they're at a distance from us. So I've come up with a technology that just makes them a lot closer to the surface, as if I don't know, maybe I'd use an allegory like you're fishing at a pond, right? And you know how the water is usually darker as it goes down to the point where you can't even see, in a proper pond. Well, my technology is the fishing line, and you throw it out there, and the fish at the bottom are your memories, and the line just kind of spools them in and brings them up to the surface so that you can actually see them and touch them and interact with them again and again. That would be, I think, a fairer point of what he's doing, and a far easier way to convey the type of technology he's done, where he basically says something like the fungus is the fishing line, and it just grabs and shrinks, or it copies and rebuilds, but they use, there's a nice little monologue of all the amygdala, the cerebellums, cerebral cortex, all those types of things. It's like, yep, we all, if you retain anything from your mid high school science class of biology, you probably remember what those words are and kind of how they function. But in this case here, I think it's a little bit above the general audiences. So it'd be better if he framed it with, here's the technical thing, and then here's the allegory of what I'm trying to actually do.
Yeah.
And they left out the allegory part.
Well, and then the funny part, like you said, that's a little bit too much technobabble, where you could describe it visually or some way that it relates to it. But at this point, and on another level, I was going, how's Graham a bad guy? I like Graham.
Yeah.
Why do I want Jacob to rob from him? At this point, I'm like, well, okay, Jacob's a bad guy. Now, that's just me.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm thinking. Because I'm like, Graham's trying to do good. Now, I'm okay with the idea of that, sometimes you see somebody's good and they're going to eventually turn bad. That's cool, but that's where I'm at this point of the script going, why are we doing this? But but again, I'm going to keep reading and all that stuff, or I'll keep watching. And so I guess that's good. I'm kind of hooked that way.
Well, yeah, I mean, I felt, because we learned about this around halfway through the script. What's the technology and how is it working? Graham has been recruiting people who are from a hospital. Some are from the insane asylum part. Others are just general. There's one guy that's an amputee who, using his technology, is able to sync up better with his prosthetic limb, that because he lost his real arm and then he has a prosthetic limb that's a little bit trickier for him to to learn.
Yeah.
But then because he's able to restore the memories of what it's like to physically have the hand there and not just be the phantom limb syndrome, the patient is able to use the advanced prosthetic instantly as if he's never lost his hand or arm in the first place, and that's like this miracle thing. And you're like, wow, yes, to your point, Jake. Yeah, Graham's a great dude doing these experiments and stuff, and it's in the early stages, but he's essentially found a way to get around all these neurological issues with patients, and so it's like, okay, he discovers what this technology is. Now the next question is like, so now his next aspect is he has to now steal it and get it into the hands of Niles to fulfill his end of the contract. But what's the one thing that we're missing in this screenplay so far, which is, well, what's at stake, right? Like, why does Jacob need to do this job? We never know. Niles, we understand what's at stake for him. He could lose his company that he took from his dad. But we find out that because he took it from his dad and he could lose it, it's like, well, I don't care if he loses it. He took it from his dad. Like, he didn't earn this. So, the heck with him.
Yeah.
Graham, on the other side, we don't know exactly what his motivation is, but he's experimenting with this new technology that's helping people. So, there's an altruistic underlining going on there. So, we like him. And so I'm halfway through the script and I can't answer the question, like, well, why is this important?
Yeah. Yeah. And if Jacob goes along and he's just doing it just for money, or, then do we like him?
Right.
Is this somebody I want to root for? Other things I start to drift off and think, well, maybe he's going to, anyway. So that's why it's just easy to get lost there at that point.
Well, it is because without a character motivation, at least our main protagonist, who it appears is Jacob in the script, if we don't know why they're doing it, other than the fact that they're doing it, we now have gotten away from a character-driven story and now we're into a plot-driven story. So we've got the plot of that Jacob is doing this because it's the job and he's told he has to do it. The writer needs him to do it, but we're missing that connective tissue between the audience and the character. Is to, okay, if he wins and he gets this contract, how does that benefit Jake? Well, or we don't know. If he loses, how does that benefit Jacob? Well, we don't know. So if there's no stakes and we have no goals, why are we following this guy? And we get no sense of him longing for something or nothing. It's very functional. And you brought up a good question with regards to, like, how would this work if it was a James Bond film, right?
Yeah, that's right. And this is the point where James Bond, it would be good if it was a James Bond film, because we would know why this technology could, we could assume that this government, this country needs it because this guy could be bad. We would accept all of those things because we know James Bond and we know he may do bad things, but he does it for a better cause. So we're borrowing the credibility of James Bond at this point, but maybe even from past movies or just known things about the character.
Yeah, or like, for instance, you have the archetype of say M and James Bond, right? And then you have this type of premise, which is that M tells James Bond, Niles Caldwell, in a corporate takeover, exiled his father from the company he started, and his father has now been a reclusive in Greece, working on some sort of neural technology that we think could have disastrous effects on individuals throughout the world. We don't know if he's going to use it for altruistic reasons or if he's going to take revenge on his son and the board that exiled him from his company. Either way, whatever technology he is doing on, we need to know what it is and put it and make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. So 007, that is your task. And it's like, okay, great. The MI6 and the British government think that there is something dangerous going on at Graham Caldwell's estate, and James Bond is there to find out what it is and make a determination. We understand that because one party has expressed concern over the technology that Graham is making. In this script here, there's no concern. It's just greed. Niles wants to find out what his dad's doing to save his position in the company that he stole from his father. That there's no stakes there for Niles, especially considering we're not even following Niles. It's not his story.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we would accept a whole lot more if we had some it was tied to something, but none of these people are tied to anything beyond what we've read about.
Right. I mean, it's
Seen.
we're getting the sense that okay, Graham is doing something that's helping people with neurological issues, and we can speculate even though it's never addressed. And I think that's a big part that was missed in this script, is that's never addressed with regards to Alzheimer's, where it's like this procedure could actually cure Alzheimer's and allow people to get total recall of all the memories that they've ever had. Um, at a greater sense than the likes of which we've never experienced before, and what that could mean for the world, and is this guy doing it as a gift, or is he going to profit off it? Like, we get none of that information at all. It's all very specific and centered, and so because we don't get any of that motivation from Jacob or Graham, we're just kind of seeing events take place. And one of the bigger events that comes into play is when Jacob goes to the fish market to get obviously fish and other supplies for the next meal he's going to make to impress Graham. And he runs into this redheaded woman named who we don't find out her name for a good, not until like towards the end of the second act of the script, but well, for the purpose of the conversation, we'll call her Helena because that's her name.
Is that it? Yeah.
And he meets this young woman named Helena, and there's a little bit of back and forth flirting and play, but at the same time she's also very resistant of him. And we get a whole subplot of him doing his daily stuff, talking with Graham, making food, trying to figure out more information about this technology that's being worked on. And as he makes his way back into the city, he bumps into her again at doing various things, and he's trying to seduce her, and she keeps on putting up a shield. And this kind of feels like it doesn't go anywhere until much later. This actually comes into a setup later on, which is that Jacob wants to try and figure out all the details of how this technology works and experiment works, so he can get the information to Niles. And he decides that all the security cameras are state of the art, but he decides he's going to trigger an EMP somehow to shut down and reset the cameras, which will take about 22 minutes for it to do.
I liked how you said somehow, because that's exactly, I read that over a couple of times and went, all right. I liked his little voiceovers to the Sony Walkman, because we got more out of when he was explaining to Niles in tapes that he was going to send to him. We understood what Jacob was going to do, but then when I was actually reading it, I was going, wait, what's he doing? I don't get it.
Right.
He's got this, and that's going to, and he's done it already. That's where I think it started to speed up. So I was going to ask you, visually, is this relying on the visuals of the movie to tell us more of a story that these words are not? Is there, I mean, because I'm reading the words and I'm going, I don't know how he's going to do the MP. I don't even understand what he's described the security system.
Right.
He's described what he's going to do, what Graham's doing, and that kind of caught me back up. But as he's doing it, the script's losing me. So would you have to rely on the visual?
Well, I mean, the visuals are kind of described in here, so yeah, you have to predicate a lot more on it, and maybe beef it up with another pass. But essentially, if I'm remembering this correctly, he fashions an EMP out of his taser.
Yeah.
And yeah. I'm like, I don't know if that's going to be strong enough of a charge to knock out a security system, because I mean, what many people probably don't realize is that a lot of our technology has a basic level of electromagnetic protection to it already. That is by design, because we face solar flares, and sometimes accidents can occur, especially if a transformer blows in your neighborhood. That sends out an EMP pulse that can screw around with technology. So they kind of take that into, modern technology has taken that into account. And this script is supposed to take place several years in the future. They don't tell us specifically, they just say several years in the future. And so I'm like, okay, this one is really stretching my suspension of disbelief. So how Like if he said, "Oh, I'm going to use the coil of my taser to be able to be an emitter of a pulse, but I'm going to use the power system of the house to do that." Like that would make a bit more sense. It's like, okay, I'm going to plug into a receptacle, activate the pulse when there's a lightning storm, and when that gets big, loud thunder and volts and what have you. That's when you trigger the pulse and shuts it down, which is what he does. But I just don't believe he ever had the source of the power to do that. Because if this is a guy who was a billionaire, who had this massive technology, and he's a genius enough to kind of essentially restore neurological disorders, he should have a pretty state-of-the-art security system that would not allow something to be so easily short-circuited. With a MacGyvered taser EMP pulse.
Yeah, and that was exactly what I was thinking. Was he's got this state of the art security system. Hardening it for an EMP pulse would be a simplified, and then it's very it's just something you would do with not even as an afterthought. It would just be part of it. That it kind of played up the old trope of it takes 21 minutes to reboot type of a thing where, part of the reboot system will be this, and then the cameras will be down, and then I can do this. And that felt a little bit too forced.
Too convenient. It would have made more sense if Niles gave him the device. He said, this is one of the things that our military department has built up. It is a targeted EMP pulse. It will take out specifically the security system that his father installed because his company installed it. It's like, we know it installed it. Here's this device. When you have to get into the information, press this button. It'll do this trigger. Here's the information of what it does. Like, this is your Q branch moment, right?
Exactly.
They could have done that in there. Like Miles just says, here's this device. What is it? It's an EMP pulse. Well, antiquated, don't you think? No. Our company designed and installed the security system that my father is using at his estate. This will disable it, but it'll only disable it for a moment, and it'll take 21 minutes for the computer systems to check their diagnostics and then reactivate the cameras. So that's all you got, and you can only use it once, because if you use it again, Graham's going to realize something's off, because nothing over there should be shutting down more than once within many, many months or years. So that is how you kind of frame that. But the writer didn't do that. He decided, I'm going to make Jacob a bit more savvy and use a taser gun to generate an EMP pulse strong enough to take out these cameras. And I was like, okay, you're kind of losing me here. I like the set piece that follows, but how you got there, too contrived for my liking, and personally for me.
Exactly, because when you're watching James Bond and Q is introducing all the gadgets, you're just waiting for James Bond to use them at that point.
Right.
And you're also waiting for him to misuse one or to use it in a different way than Q wanted him to. And that's just kind of part of the things that you subconsciously accept. That was one of the issues I was starting to have problems with, was when sometimes the information was exchanged. If the other person was telling Jacob, it would have been more impactful, or like Niles giving him that's, he's a spy. He's the one who thinks on his feet. He adapts in the moment. He verbally spars with every character. They're playing head games. They're trying to one up each other, but he does rely on all of these other things. And in some cases, it was Jacob that already knew. So he's the spy that already knows everything. And that always pulls me out, because I like here. And I don't even think about it after that point. Once Q hands James Bond the something, it works. It's a pen that will blow up a car. You don't even question it. And that's a way to get around that suspension of disbelief. Niles' company developed that. He knows about it.
Yeah.
And then the fun part is watching Jacob use it or misuse it.
Exactly. But I mean, I will say this though, the set piece that follows is not too bad. I mean, he manages to dash across the compound. He gets into the lab. He reviews a whole bunch, like he has his own portable power, which allows him to activate the computers, and he reviews a lot of the research, and he sees, the mice in the maze and how he blindfolds the mice, and they manage to they have instant recall of what the maze, what the maze is. So they're able to navigate it without any issue. And you find out like, well, what's the delivery system? Well, it's this really tiny, hard to see powder that you can ingest through liquid or through food, and it builds these new pathways in the brain. And it's like, wow, this is really, really neat, cool stuff. And just as he's about to kind of make his way back, Andrea wakes up and starts doing a security perimeter search because the power has gone out and security camera's not working, and so she's looking through the lab, and he's kind of cat and mousing, trying to get around her, and he ends up hiding in this freezer that's minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, which is freaking cold.
Yes. That takes your breath away.
or no, sorry, it's 30 degrees Celsius, minus 3 Fahrenheit, something like that. And
yeah,
it's
minus
really
4 or something. Yeah.
And so he's in there until she leaves, and then when she leaves, that's when the power boots up and the cameras are starting to reactivate. And when the power boots up, it triggers an automatic lock in the freezer, so it locks him inside, which is always weird for me because if you have a big enough, all big freezers have to have an emergency release from the inside out.
Yeah.
You can't have an exterior lock only on it. Most of them have a little hole in the handle that goes into basically like your traditional pin and lock door latch, and so that's your only external part. But those have to be manual. You can't have those automatic because again, someone could be trapped inside by accident. So we have this very elaborate set piece where he is stuck inside there, and he has to try to find a way to disconnect the power to the freezers to let himself out.
I liked that. It was fun to read and it was fun to visualize. But exactly, I've actually installed and built a couple of deep freeze for in buildings for the product, and worked on the refrigeration and stuff like that. And it is a big deal. Yeah, you have a push button on the doors. It's thought of, but most people don't interact with that. It was fun to watch, but my mind was going away from that.
Yeah, because I mean, I worked in high school. I used to work in places that had walk-in freezers, and it's like, yep, you cannot be locked in here. The only way you can be locked in is if someone actually puts a pin between the handle and the wall to lock you in there physically, and that's it. Like they don't allow for that.
Yeah, the accident happened a long time ago, and we've all learned from it.
Exactly. So yeah, while that part was contrived, I did like the fact that he used the fan. He had to reach in and grab a wire from inside the fan and use the fan to cut it so that it could cut the power to the freezer and allow him to come out. But I bet it also sets up something good, which is that definitely someone is going to be noticing the fact that this freezer is no longer getting power to it, and they're going to investigate. Well, how did this wire get cut? And at the same time, Jacob cuts his finger on it, so his blood is going to be on that fan blade.
Yes.
And so he's got evidence of him being there, or at least there will be evidence of someone being there. And since he's the only new addition to the property, everybody's going to be looking at him. So we have
and then he's got a cut finger.
Yes, and so now we got a ticking time clock. But what I thought was quite inventive is that as soon as he gets out of the freezer and he's trying to warm himself up, he realizes he only has a couple minutes left before those cameras activate. So he makes his way to the kitchen and then starts grabbing things out of the fridge to make it appear like he decided to get a snack late at night and wasn't aware of what's going on around him. And as he returns to his room, Graham comes out and he's struggling. And here we learn that Graham has a pacemaker and that the EMP has actually wreaked havoc on it. And so the paramedics are like 10, 15 minutes away, so they're not going to get there in time, and Graham is going to die, in which case Jacob loses his contract. So what does Jacob do? Well, he brings out the taser again, and he gets some vodka and a kitchen knife, and he makes an incision, and he uses the taser to restart the battery in the pacemaker to save Graham's life. And I was kind of rolling my eyes on this one too.
Yeah. They used a line. I'm a dropped out engineer.
Right.
I dropped out to go to cooking school. So in a way they did what they could do. So that, again, that's another time I was going to ask you. So if you had charming actor. You've invested all your time into this story. We just kind of push past that through maybe good acting, charming character, because that is a weak point. He can do it. He's
Yeah,
fixing the
the
pacemaker.
the more logical thing to do would be um,
Chop.
chest compressions. Just
Yeah. Oh yeah.
hit like yeah, you might break his ribs, but you're trying to manually keep his heart pumping, or at least keeping the circulation going until the paramedics get there. Um,
It felt a little contrived, like it needed to set up another part that comes down coincidentally right after.
yeah, but I mean, well, this is what it was. It was like we got to weaken Graham, who up until this point, for a 60-year-old guy, is in very good shape. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, he was hanging from a rope.
yeah,
And
he's hanging from a rope, not with like a harness or anything, but just holding onto the rope with one arm and then painting with the other.
yeah.
and so yeah, it's quite it was quite something that okay, now he uh now Graham is in a state of recovery, and we find out that Helena is a at-home caretaker for an at-home nurse and so forth. So she is now brought in to the house to tend to Graham, and this is how we get Helena and Jacob together. And so now we're just got this new dynamic of these two guys, two girls in this mansion doing their thing, going day to day, and we're set up with an excursion to the opera at this old restored, like this ancient coliseum of sorts that was retrofitted to host modern concerts in Greece. And so the four of them go there and they see an opera of oh gosh, what was the opera's name again? I can't remember. But
Yeah, that stuff went over my head anyway.
it just felt it felt a little Bondian in regards to we're going to have this beautiful artistic set piece between these people here, but at the same time it just felt a little disingenuous. It's like, okay, so we're doing this because why? Like, why are we going to see this this play? It's they go to the Odeon of Herodes in Atticus. That's where they go. So and they're watching the Strauss opera Daphne. That's the one. Now I decided to check it here. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting. Maybe there's something going on here. Maybe the opera is an allegory for what the rest of the story is, and if it is, it doesn't quite land as strongly as I think the writer wanted it to. At least in my opinion.
Yeah.
But yeah, they all four of them, they go out to the opera, and then of course Graham and Andrea, because they're over the age of 50, decide, okay, we're gonna go home, and then that's where Helena and Jacob decide, okay, well, we're just gonna hit the town for a few hours, and then we'll take a cab back. And so they go out on a date of sorts. They go dancing, they go drinking, and then they go out to the rocks and they make love under the stars. And that's when Helen reveals that she's another agent that Niles has sent to help Jacob with his plan. And Jacob freaks out. And he's just like, no, this is not part of the plan. This is not how I operate. I can't have another person in here. That's too many variables. Basically, he sends a message to Niles. He's like, we are getting out now. Like, we're going to grab everything we can. We're just hightailing it. And then we learn from Niles, and he's trying to send a message back to Jacob. And he says, I didn't send a another person over there. I don't know who that is. So I'm coming to figure this out. And that is sadly the area that we can't really proceed further in this script for you guys, because it goes a little haywire-y in one sense. I will say there's a bunch of film references that I picked up on as I tweeted out in for this particular episode on the social media. It's a film that kind of mixes in Basic Instinct to Ex Machina to The Devil's Advocate, Raiders of the Lost Ark, with a touch of Get Out to it. And yeah, it's it's a head scratcher. I mean,
Yeah.
to put it lightly, like that's what I mean. It is appropriately titled Head Games, and we find out part of the motivation for Graham is he has a ticking clock of his own that he needs to do. But it comes in so late that I don't think everything that we've read up to this point feels like a proper setup to that reveal and that payoff.
Yeah. At least as written, there's a lot of work to cipher out. Okay, this is why. Rereads, which would be easier with a rewrite probably. Overall, I like the concept, but I want to see the story finished. I liked it's the genre I like, so.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a mystery. It's an interesting mystery, but it's missing the stakes. Like, I think that's one of the things that kept me at arm's length from it is, oh, there's some interesting dynamics here. Yeah, all the characters kind of have very, very similar voices to how they speak and the word choices they use. But the gimmick of this neuroscience and what it can do and how it's implemented and whatnot, I thought, okay, that's kind of fascinating. That's something. It's not computer dependent, which I liked. It's like, oh, it's chemistry. Okay, cool. I dig that. That's fun. That's different in science fiction and in mystery and thrillers of this type. But it just felt, again, like I could not tell you what is at stake for this story. And this is a purely plot-driven story, and it's very much in the style of like how a first-time writer thinks, where characters do things because the writer needs them to do things, and doesn't hide that play under what does this mean to the character, right? Like, if again,
it happened because it needed to happen.
It happened because it needed to happen. I did a reference with regards to, like, the Saint. The Saint is a character who he has a number he needs to reach with regards to finances, and once he gets that number, he is no longer going to be this mercenary spy type character. And that's because he wants a different life. He has his goals for a more calming, peaceful, nice life. That's his price. Once he gets that, he's done. That's his motivation. We get nothing of that from Jacob. Like, we have no idea why he's this type of guy, why he's in this line of business, what he gets out of it. Completely ambiguous. And as a result, we can't connect or even feel for him at all throughout this story.
Yeah, yes. Nothing to relate to.
Exactly. So, like, let's say he succeeds. Okay, what happens next? Okay, Niles gets his technology and he does his thing, and then Jacob goes off to another contract. So what? Don't care. What if he fails? Well, he fails, he loses the contract, he doesn't get the money. Okay, so
goes on to another contract, unless he's died.
Maybe he finds another contract, or maybe he dies. So what? Who cares? There's nothing there. There's no there. And I mean, it's rather disappointing in that regard, because, I mean, even if you take a look back to James Bond, the idea is that if James Bond fails, this maniacal person with this thing that they're doing is going to take over the world. It's like that. Like, he is the last line of defense, and he's on the front line of it. So, like, he's getting in there before you have to get the army involved and all that stuff. And hopefully he's going to stop the plan before it reaches its critical mass and takes out the Western civilization. We don't have anything of those levels of stakes here at all. And because Jacob is a private spy, he doesn't work for a larger company. He is individual private contractor. People reach out to him, they hire him to do the stuff, and he does it. It's not. Yeah, it's very amateur, and it feels like an independent movie that I would see at like a festival, where I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
cool set pieces, all right, sexy cast, fun dialogue, interesting concepts and stuff, but I you've given me nothing at stake to worry about, to concern, to think, to ponder, to ask others, like, oh, what would have happened if the guy won, though, or what would happen if he lost? Like, you don't have those questions, and those are the questions you need in order to make an audience invested into a film.
Yeah. Exactly. I was thinking the same thing, and the part we can't talk about, but it almost makes it feel like it's someone else's story.
Yeah, it
And
feels like the
we just happen
protagonist.
to be experiencing it through Jacob's view.
Yeah, it feels like a protagonist is not really the protagonist.
Yeah. Yeah.
um. So I mean, I'm kind of surprised that it rated so highly on the list, but number 4.
Yeah.
Um.
Um, I was gonna say that it was 4. That's it's got a lot to it though, but not as it is.
I think it's probably mostly on the premise and some of the things that they could do on camera that hasn't really been shown in cinema recently. I think those things kind of inspired, um, the producers to be like, okay, yeah, I could get behind this. We've got a game of wits, mind games, head games, a couple of very easy to film set pieces that are thrilling and decent, but but again, it's missing that one thing at the end, which is like, well,
Why?
what happens next? So what?
Yeah.
Uh,
So what?
and so that I guess that leads us into our voting. So as the script is in its current state, Jake, would you give this a green light or a pass?
In its current state, no, I wouldn't. I have some thoughts of how to fix it, what I would do,
Right.
but no, I would give it a pass, but I would say it's certainly you could make this.
Right.
It's got everything it needs. It either needs to be a James Bond movie, and we know we borrow from Bond, or my other thought, Jacob could be just I'm a corporate espionage thief. So he's a bad guy, and maybe he wants to get the money, like in The Saint. But so for us, when we feel something for him, maybe he's struggling and he wants to be a better person. He didn't want to be a thief.
Mm-hmm.
His father died, and circumstances, he was good at lying. He took the easy path, but it wasn't always the best for him. You know, I feel like if you added those elements to the story, you've got yourself a winner. But
No, I agree. For myself, it's a reluctant pass because again, I think the concept is rich. Um, I think there could be more done with this type of concept, but to your point, yeah, it's missing that element that makes me want to connect with Jake. I need a connection to that main character to find out, okay, is he a villain that's being taken on a journey where he becomes a hero in the end? What is he doing this for? If he was a spy for a government agency, this could probably work out well, a lot better. Like you could rewrite this into a pretty good James Bond film, or given the ending, you could probably set it up as maybe a two-parter in the spy game, and that's as far as I'm going to go with that. Because
yeah, I
I will
mean,
say this: the
like
ending is dark and fun.
yeah, the accountant set up a new spy agency.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to go with an older. You have another clandestine organization, or
Right.
so it's certainly out there. I
Yeah.
mean, I like that it had a smaller cast, like characters,
Oh yeah.
but it
Five
did need
five
something
people.
beyond it to drive it. That would definitely give it a benefit.
Yeah. I mean, it's
And they
it's
don't even have to be a big part, just in name only.
right. I mean,
To apply something more.
this does have a lot of advantages. Like if a movie producer were looking at this and they said, okay, the only thing that's elaborate here is the location in Greece. Well, there's lots of tax credits we could use over there, so that could make that cheap. Number 2, it's only 5 characters, 2 of which are your main cast, and the other 3 are supporting. So that makes it easy on the budget. Don't need a whole lot of a whole lot of days with them. So it's mostly a 2-hander. It's centralized to a location in this mansion, which you can either rent a house or build a standing set, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
So it's on the surface, it's a very affordable movie. So I can see that being tantalizing to producers. And then the concept alone is like, oh, okay, so we're talking about neuroscience and the human brain and a lot of some of the depictions of what's going on there. Well, we can just computer animate that. We don't actually have to do any actual thing. It's not expensive for that at all. There's only one huge set piece, and that's affordable. So yeah, I could see this on a budgetary side of things. This sounds like it could be a strong contender. But for myself, like, it's a reluctant pass because I'm thinking, if we shoot this as is and we put it out to theaters, people might like it, but I mean, I don't think they'll go back. Or they might get hoodwinked by the ending to be like, ooh, and then I'm like, yeah, but what does it really mean? And because that's the question that you don't want to have your audience answer after so long. I mean, it's not like, The Sixth Sense, which has that great payoff, where you find out that, oh, this is just, this is how this character is spending their time and what they're doing, what they're good at, and how it's helping this kid. That there's that payoff. And then you have the other one where, I'm trying to think, what's a movie with a dark ending that doesn't really mean much of anything. Those are hard for me to remember because they're bad.
Well, it's like all the horror movies, the hero always gets, 'cause the bad guy always ends up never quite dead.
Right.
Sometimes the hero doesn't make it, so they never really end well. But
yeah, kind of like a Freddy Krueger type deal.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's not. Yeah, and it's also got the ex machina aspect of it, where you're not supposed to trust the AI. And
Yeah, that's true.
So I mean, it's got some of those gimmicks to it, but I don't know. Again, for me, like, I think one of the hindrances, not hindrances. What's a better word? I think one of the things that hinder stories of this type is you introduce us to a character, but you don't give us their motivation or what's at stake for what they're doing. And I think that's one of the biggest parts of this, is that if we knew why Jacob is in this line of work and why he's doing it and why he picks this job, then I think this would be a winner. This would be a really good low budget movie that, it's not going to break box office records, but it will make its money back and people would really dig it, and it would be a good one-off. At the same time.
Yeah, and if it did really well, you could stretch it into more.
Yeah, you could do something else with it. Yeah.
But it finishes on its own.
Mm-hmm.
That's an appeal. Not trying to make a trilogy right from the get-go. Save the best for the next one. I don't like that.
No, again, I tell every writer, it's like, oh yeah, I got this trilogy. Really? How good is part 1? Well, part 1 sets up part 2. No, I don't care. How good is part 1? That's pretty good. Is part 3 better? Yeah, maybe you should start with part 3 and then try and beef up then the subsequent ones, as opposed to trying to build up a thing on the whole. Just because, again, you don't want to watch 2 movies, a setup and then a payoff that might not live up to it. I mean, there's no better example than The Matrix, right? where they spend a whole movie setting up, and then the third one, it's like, what the hell was that?
Yeah. Well, it was satisfying as the original, so can't take that, but yeah, it got people back out a couple more times.
Yeah, I mean, well, it definitely built up the intrigue, but you can only ask the audience of that so much before they become distrustful. And I think this one here, in order to earn the trust of the audience and also be a solid story, I think would be a bit more worthy of that top 5, within the top 5 of what it placed here, is, and that's just my opinion, is that Jacob Dalton needs a very compelling character motivation.
Yeah. Yeah. tied, yep, whether he's tied into something else or you just get a little bit more about him.
Right. All right. So, Jake, before we wrap it up, any final thoughts on head games?
Yeah, I had referred to when his father said he liked the spending the time with him,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't even mind, and he was proud of him of the time he put into that. If that had been shared more when Jacob's, in the back half of the back part of the movie, we can't script we can't talk about
Right.
it. Where it's, well, it's no surprise we're dealing with memories. He could have a memory that he didn't quite realize the importance of, and then you'd have a little bit more of a payoff of his character, getting some in memory form, maybe a memory he discarded as because he felt like he was responsible for his father's death, or just even while mourning, that now that he's an adult, he gets to relive that memory, kind of like you were talking about, the whole benefit of bringing the memories back. Now he's, now he needs it. He needs that reassurance from his father, and then that can help him in his conflict with the characters at the end of the twist.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Where it was shared at that moment, it was just the emotional payoff of it went nowhere. But it could really be something that gets him through a tough point at the
Yeah.
end of the script. And it's all set up there. It's all there. It's all possible. I mean, no one else can have that recall of a memory, and as if you're reliving it in that moment, but this script has clearly set that up. So
Right. I mean, and I think that's something that could have been exploited a little better as well. I'm in the same pool you are with that, Jake. Yeah. Okay.
that was the last thing that I was going to say.
Well, I mean, hey, that's good. This was a fun conversation. Even though I wouldn't greenlight this script, I do recommend people give it a read. There's a lot of aspects to it that are quite interesting, and I think that the payoff and the climax in the third act is something that people would I would say appreciate. So yeah, I strongly recommend checking it out. It's called Head Games, written by Colin Liddell. You shouldn't have too difficulty finding it, but if you do have an issue doing that, just reach out to me on the Twitter X at ScriptDoctorPhD. You can also consider supporting us over on Patreon at patreon.com/ScriptDoctor, where you find out what scripts you're reading on the Mondays. We get recorded live show. These live shows here will be archived on the Patreon as well as on YouTube and Spotify. And I also have musings and articles and reviews and teachings of screenwriting process as there as well, archived for you all. And I also pop in some new ones here and there when I come to an interesting revelation that can be beneficial to a lot of people. With that being said, Jake, I want to thank you for joining me this Saturday night. It's been fun as always. I can't wait to see what next we have with you in the near future.
Thank you for the invite. It was a interesting conversation.
It was for a very interesting script too. And you know what? The other part, I will point this out. It wasn't a slog or a pain in the butt to read. I mean, that was nice. It's like yeah, this is, it's not great, but it's not a chore.
Yes. Yeah. It had all the elements to keep you, even if you didn't understand, or even if you couldn't really go, well, why?
Right.
I can feel for you, but you could at least enjoy what you were reading, and the content was interesting.
Absolutely. All right. So I want to thank everyone out there for listening, watching, what have you. We'll be back next week with another screenplay to discuss as well. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody, and never forget, when it comes to great story, it all starts with the script.